What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Clutch Talk today, and episode 9 today. And super excited to get this video today. We got Oregon and Notre Dame. We can continuing our season previews of each college football team this upcoming season. Two teams that had very, very successful seasons last year. Oregon went undefeated in the regular season. Disappointing end, losing in the playoff, but still had a very good year. And Notre Dame obviously made the national championship last year and was the runner-up. A lot to get to today. Oregon, Notre Dame, and then the next video will be South Carolina and Miami, breaking down those teams, just continuing to work our way down. If you're interested in this content and you like the video, subscribe to the channel. And let's get started today. We're going to start with the Oregon Ducks. And Oregon, to me, had such a weird year last year. Again, they went undefeated. It was very successful. But that ending to Ohio State was very embarrassing fashion. And now they got to regroup, and they have a lot changing. New quarterback, lots of new pieces, plug and play from the transfer portal that Dan Lang's going to have to use to his disposal. Dante Moore is the story, obviously, at quarterback. He was a five-star out of high school. Crazy recruiting story. He committed to Oregon originally, was going to play at Oregon. Then he decommitted and went to UCLA with Chip Kelly. And he started as a freshman. He did not have a good year that year. I think he had just as many touchdowns and interceptions, very unsuccessful. And then he transfers back to Oregon after that year because Chip Kelly went back to the NFL or went to Ohio State. And he sat behind Dylan Gabriel this year, learned from Dylan Gabriel, and now Oregon fans and Dan Lanning really believe that he's ready to take that role as a starter. He's going to need to be better than he was at UCLA last year in order for them to find success, and I think he can be. The talent's obviously there. He finished top 3 in Elite 11 when he was there coming out of high school. All the talent's there. Oregon's a good place for him. It was probably a better fit than UCLA, but we'll see how he does. And then running back, they're going to bring in Mekhi Hughes. He's from Tulane, had about 1,300 yards, 15 touchdowns. He'll be the lead back along with Noah Whittington, will be a very solid backup for them. Receiver room, this is what I want to talk about with receiver room. They did lose Evan Stewart, who would be the receiver one this year to an injury that happened right before the end of spring ball. Now there's a chance he comes back at the very tail end of the season, but more than likely they think he is done for the season with an injury. And that hurts their receiver really bad because he would have been the easy number one and would have gotten a ton of targets. So they don't have him. They're going to have to rely a lot on Malik Benson, who was 300 yards receiving last year. He's from Florida State. And they're going to have to rely on Justice Lowe, who had about 200 yards last year, and then Kyler Casper, who has yet to see a lot of action, but he's a 6'6 receiver, big body, extremely highly recruited coming out of high school. They're going to have to rely on a lot of new people this year, Oregon is, so I'm very interested to see how they do there. Tight end will be Keon Sadley, who was their starter last year, about 300 yards receiving at tight end position. And then offensive line suffered a lot of change because they had a lot of players get drafted and graduated. Both tackles are transfers. One is from Texas State. The other one's from Nevada. The one from Nevada, though, they say is really good. He was a 5-star transfer, top 5 transfer in the country. And then they return their center, but then they have to get a transfer guard from USC. So you're talking about 3 transfers on the offensive line. So I'm very interested to see how they gel early in the season. So that wraps up the offense. We'll get to the numbers on them later from last year. Defensively, Mateo Uiagalelei is back as one of the top edge rushers. He's obviously the brother of the infamous DJ U, the quarterback who bounced around, it felt like, everywhere and was never successful. He had Mateo, though, is much better than DJ. 11 tackles for loss, 9 sacks. He's going to be all Big Ten, potentially All-American. The interior of the defensive line, Tim Tuiote, 8 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. He's going to be on the interior. And then they got Bear Alexander, who has been a known name in the portal now. He went from Alabama, went to USC, and now he's going from USC to Oregon. Only had 5 tackles last year. He barely saw the field at USC. So they're probably going to end up starting him at interior defensive tackle, so I don't know how that's going to look. And then Amari Washington, 2 tackles for loss last year. He'll be on the other edge. Linebacker room looks very, very strong. Bryce Boetcher, obviously, at 87 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 4 pass deflections. Kind of the centerpiece of that front 7. And then Devin Jackson at 3 tackles for loss and 2 sacks last year as well. But Bryce Boetcher is definitely the leader up front along with Mateo Uiagalelei as the 2 leaders up front. And then Secondary, they revamped the secondary. Oregon did much different than it was last year. They went and got Theron Johnson from Northwestern. He had 10 pass deflections, 2 interceptions. And then they got Jaden Kennedy out of Ole Miss, who had 11 pass deflections last year. Both will be playing the corners. And then you got Dalen Austin at nickel, who had 2 tackles for loss last year. So corners are very new. And then they went and got, in my opinion, the best safety in the portal. And Dylan Thieneman out of Purdue had 104 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 6 pass deflections. He's going to be a stud, especially in the Oregon defensive system. Now, he's not on the 1-11 Purdue team that it was last year. He's going to be on one of the best teams in the country, and he's going to show off to a lot of people. And then you got Peyton Woodward, who's kind of stepping in that new role, had only 9 tackles last year, but he's expected to have a big jump as well. So that kind of wraps up roster-wise. A lot of new pieces. I think I named 5 transfers defensively that are starting and about 7 transfers starting offensively for Oregon. So a very new team, but a new transition for Dan Lanning. These are a lot more Dan Lanning's players, which I think he's more excited about than anything. And then if we look at the numbers from last year, offense was good last year, except the problem was they were only 72nd in rushing, and I think that should be better. They brought in Mike Hughes for a reason. And him and Noah Whittington together could be a very good running back duo, especially if the offensive line ends up gelling well with the transfers they brought in. There are 40 in sacks allowed again. That's part of the new offensive line. They're trying to bolster those numbers. They were very good on third down last year, 9th in the country on third down. So I'm interested to see if they can keep that up. And then defensively, they were really good last year. Very underrated defense, in my opinion. 15th in total defense, 16th in sacks, 16th in scoring, and 25th in passing. And I think the secondary, I think the portal secondary that Dan Lanning brought in is much better than what he even has secondary last year. I really like the secondary he has this year, and it could be very good. They were 86 in the red zone defensively. That's part of, I think, another year of having a more solid defensive line in front 7. I think they could improve those numbers. That's kind of the wrap down of Oregon. Oregon's a team also that I think is playing with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. The last 2 years is what we could define as what could have been for Oregon. The last 2 seasons have been seasons of what could have been. You had Bo Nix, who was the Heisman frontrunner. You go to the Pac-12 championship game. All you have to do is win that game, and you're in the playoff, right? And they had to play Washington. People don't remember Washington. The year they're in that season, they play Washington. They lose by Dan Lanning trying to go for it instead of kicking the field goal. Didn't go his way. He didn't get it. Then Washington goes down and wins the game. Well, then they play him in the Pac-12 championship game. Washington physically embarrasses Oregon, and they lose that game, and they lose the college football playoff, and Bo Nix loses the Heisman. Fast forward to this past season, you go undefeated, you win the Big Ten, everything's going right for Oregon. You look like you can go win a national championship, and you get buzzsawed by your Big Ten rival, Ohio State, in the first playoff game you play in the Rose Bowl. So that's the chip on the shoulder. I think Oregon does have a chip on their shoulder this year, and they're ready to prove something this year, that after all the disappointments last year, is that they're ready to make the step, and they're going to try everything they can to make that step. Doesn't mean they can do it, but they're definitely going to have that chip and try everything they can to win a national championship this year to prove people wrong. Because if we look at these worst, best, and most likely scenarios for me, the worst I think is 9-3, and it's not because I think Oregon's because I said Georgia's 8-4. I think Georgia's a better, more talented team than Oregon, maybe, but the schedule for Oregon is much more favorable. To me, the only games that you can even twist your eyes after Oregon, at Penn State, Indiana maybe, but it's at home, and I don't know how much I can trust Indiana based on what they lost from last year. And then you have at Washington, and then you got either, you could say, at Iowa or USC, one of those 3. But mainly at Washington, at Penn State are the 2 games I'm looking at. And then let's say, Dante Moore has the season he had at UCLA. The offensive line didn't turn out very well. Losing Evan Stewart does matter, and the receiver room can't get separation and can't run routes to get open. Then you could lose to USC or use at Iowa, and you can go 9-3. But I think the schedule works out for them, where I think that's the worst they can do. But it would be very disappointing for Oregon fans. Now, the best is obviously undefeated. If Dante Moore is the 5-star talent we think he is, he could go win be an All-American. The receiver room, Malik Benson takes a big step. Kyler Casper takes a big step. The secondary he brought in is just elite. And, you go into the Penn State game at night and just somehow, let's say, just somehow upset James Franklin in the big game. And at Washington's a game they should be favored in. So you got undefeated, I think, is obviously the best, and they're so talented. The most likely, I'm going to say 10-2. Just because I think they do lose at Penn State. I'm just going to say it. It's at night. It's going to be a whiteout. I don't know how to feel about that. And then, to me, there's something about either the at Washington game or the at Iowa game that I just have this. I think they'll lose one of those, or even USC. They'll lose one of those because I don't have the utmost faith in Dante Moore to be an All-American. I don't think he's going to be as bad as he was at UCLA. But I think there is reason for concern, and there is reason for concern in that receiver and that the offense could take a huge dip. And so I can't pencil in 11-1. And I think 10-2 is most likely, and that would be a good season. I think it would get Oregon in the playoff, especially if they still manage to make the Big Ten title and stuff. So overall, I think 10-2 is most likely, and that would be, to me, a successful season considering what they lost from last year. And now we're going to transition. Again, halfway point of the video if you like the video, and subscribe. And we're going to go to Notre Dame. Notre Dame had a very interesting post-spring, I guess you could say. Steve Angeli, who was projected to potentially be the starter, he entered the portal and went to Syracuse post-spring. So that put Notre Dame in such a bind, right? And now it's C.J. Carr. And he's a redshirt freshman, didn't even attempt to pass this past season. And now he's stepping to be the starting quarterback in Notre Dame. Now, with that being said, I think he has a lot of good stuff behind him. Notre Dame has a lot of momentum as a program, so I think that's also something. But he has a lot of talent around him that I think will make his job a lot easier. And he was extremely talented at high school. He was a top 50 recruit, very sought after. So I'm not really worried about him long term. I think this season, though, especially early on, because they start out with at Miami and Texas A&M. And for those to be his first two career starts definitely does raise concern. But I think he'll be good long term, and I trust Marcus Freeman with any player. Now, if you look at the roster around C.J. Carr, who isn't the confirmed starter but projected to be, you got Jeremiah Love, and he's the face of the Notre Dame offense. He had 1,100 yards last year, 17 touchdowns. Everyone's going to be focused on him if you're a defense. But it's not just him. Jadarian Price is a backup, and he had about 700 yards last year and 7 touchdowns. He's also very good. The running back depth at Notre Dame is something that didn't get talked about enough because of Jeremiah Love, and for fair reason, it's Jeremiah Love. But Jadarian Price is very good, too, if you need a change of pace at running back. And then receiver, this is where I really like the move they got out of the portal. They went and got Malachi Fields out of Virginia, 800 yards last year. I think he's going to be really good for Notre Dame. He's super fast. He's big as well. He can go make 50-50 catches. And that's something you need from a young quarterback, just to trust his receiver to go make a play and throw a 50-50 ball and know your receiver's going to come down with it. Jaden Greathouse is returning, 592 yards last year. And then Will Pauling, they also got from Wisconsin, who Will Pauling, I feel like, has been at Wisconsin for 1,000 years. But he had about 400 yards last year. He's now at Notre Dame. And you got tight end. It'll be a newer tight end, Eli Raridan, 90 yards and 3 touchdowns last year. The offensive line, they got both tackles returning, which is huge. That's what you want to see. And then they did get the entire interior of the offensive line's new. Center and right and left guard, all transfers. So that'll be very interesting to see how they do that. They were going to start Sam Pendleton, who at left guard, but he transferred to Tennessee, so they had to adjust, and the other two got drafted. But I'm very interested to see what that interior looks like, especially when this can be a run-first football team. But that wraps up the offense. Defensively, I really like this defense. I liked them last year, and I like them this year. Junior, I'm just going to say Junior T because I'm not going to try to pronounce that last name. He had 6 tackles for loss and 3 sacks last year. You got Joshua Burnham on the interior, had 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. And then Donovan Hennish, 4 tackles for loss and 4 sacks last year, all returning guys up front, which is huge. It's good to not have a bunch of transfers and new faces in the facility and in the scheme. They know the scheme, and that's super important for a defense, in my opinion. And then you got Jared Dawson, who is the transfer. He'll be on the interior, 7 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. He's from Louisville. And Marcus Freeman, if you listen to press conferences, he is raving about him right now. Linebacker, 3 returning linebackers, another big deal. Derek Brown is the mainstay of that linebacker room, had 78 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 2 pass deflections. And then Jalen Sneed, who had a very underrated year last year, he could take a huge jump. He had 6 tackles for loss and 3 sacks last year. And then Jaden Osbury had 6 tackles for loss and a sack. Very good linebacker. That front seven, having out of the front 7, having 6 of the 7 being returning players and productive returning players is a very big deal, especially for defense that was as good as it was last year. It could even take a bigger jump. So I'm excited to see that. And then corners. Again, all returning players. I mean, that's to me is actually no, I say that wrong. One of them was a transfer, 4 of them are returning. You got Leonard Moore, 11 pass deflections, 2 interceptions last year, and Christian Gray, 9 pass deflections, 3 interceptions. One of the top corner duos, returning corner duos in the country this upcoming season. I would say Oregon's corner duos top there too, but we haven't seen them play like in an Oregon uniform, so we don't know. We've seen transfer busts all the time, right? But Leonard Moore and Christian Gray are definitely up there with like the Ricky Gibsons, Jamal McCoys of the world and all that stuff. Then Adam Schuler, 5 pass deflections, 3 interceptions. He'll be safety. And then Devontae Smith had 5 pass deflections last year. He's a transfer from Alabama. So they went and got him. He's expected to have a big role as a nickel in that defense, or I should say the slot corner. And then Luke Talich, 1 interception last year. He'll be the other safety, getting a bigger role this year. And they expect a lot of them. That secondary could be very good. Devontae Smith, I think, did get a little underused at Alabama. And I think you could see a big uptick from him. And just that entire second. And again, the amount of returning production on that defense, it could be so good last year, especially with how good the numbers are that we'll get into later. Very good. Offense, numbers-wise, they could not throw a forward pass. Riley Leonard did a lot of good things, but, man, he struggled to complete a forward pass. And they were 101st in passing last year. And, C.J. Carr, that just proves that C.J. Carr does not need to be great for Notre Dame to be great because of what's all around him, the defense, the receivers, the running backs, the run game, the offensive line. They don't need him to be K. Klubnik or Arch Manning or Garrett Nussmeier. Like, they don't need that. But they just need him to stand still in the pocket, don't turn the ball over, make plays when he needs to make plays, and just be a system quarterback, right? You've heard that a lot, be a system quarterback or just be a game manager. That's really what he needs to be. And he's going to have to take advantage of the potential play-action plays. I think Notre Dame's play-action offense could be very good because you know that C.J. Carr's an experienced quarterback, but you know you have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in the backfield. You know you're going to have to bottom the run, and I think the play-action game for Notre Dame could be very good this year. But again, you have to be able to make the plays out of it. And so I'm very interested to see if Notre Dame's passing offense can even go. If they can even be 60th, the offense could improve drastically for me. They were 19th in rushing. I expect the same. They were 10th in scoring offense. They still managed to put up a ton of points without being able to throw a forward pass. Testament to the run game. They were not good on third down, not good in the red zone either. They had to be better on third down. It killed them when they lost to Ohio State and I guess we'll throw Northern Illinois when they couldn't convert on third down in the red zone. They got to be able to do that this year. Defensively, they were 4th in passing last year defensively. I expect the same just because of all who's returning. So many good secondary players back there. 49th in rushing. I do think that'll go up with the amount of returning production on the interior. I think they'll only get better. 11th in total, 4th in scoring. I expect the same. 37th in sacks. I expect something similar to that. And then they were really good on third down in the red zone too. One of the premier defenses, and I expect it to potentially even get better with them returning. Because having continuity in college football now is so important because of the portal. Getting all those guys back and barely losing anybody of the portal is such a big deal, and it'll show. You'll see teams that get retention and continuity, how what the difference is between those teams. And you'll see it, I think, from Notre Dame. Now, when it comes to worst, best, or most likely scenarios, the worst is 9-3, similar to Oregon. And I say that because I do think they actually have a tougher schedule than Oregon, but Notre Dame's more talented, and just in my opinion. But worst is 9-3, and that will be you lose at Miami, obviously. You lose to Texas A&M, and it would either be you lose one of these three games, at Pitt, USC, or you lose at Arkansas. I don't see it happening, but if, again, it'd be worst case like CJ Carr really is just not ready yet, like as a redshirt freshman, or people finally find out Jeremiah Love. You've seen preseason running backs that are preseason All-Americans. That Ollie Gordon last year is a perfect example of that, where teams figure him out. So that could be a possibility. Let's say the receiver room doesn't get that much better. And let's say the defense takes a step back from last year. And 9-3, I think, is the worst. Best is obviously undefeated. And honestly, if CJ Carr ends up being a decent quarterback or even a little bit better than Riley Leonard, they could beat Miami week 1 and cruise to undefeated season. And the most likely is 11-1. And to me, it is easy. I think the game that's most likely to lose would be one of your first two games, either A&M at home or at Miami. So both our games are at night too, which could add a little bit element to it. And the Miami game is on a Sunday, so that could play a factor too. But 11-1 is the most likely, which will put Notre Dame, in my opinion, as a top 4 seed. So you get a first round bye in the college football playoff. And again, I think CJ Carr is going to be just fine considering how bad the passing offense was last year. I don't think he can do worse. And I think he could benefit from having the running backs he has behind him in the play action game and getting the receivers that they did out of the portal. So that wraps that up. And that'll also wrap up our video today. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe again. Again, like I said, next video, it will be Miami and South Carolina. Miami brought in a ton of transfers, and we'll get into that. And South Carolina is, again, doing the retention. And they ended the season as hot as any other team in the country. Lenore Sellers is extremely talented. So we'll break him down, and we're inching closer to the season. We're about a month and a half away from sitting on the couch and doing nothing all day. So everyone get ready for that. Hope you all enjoyed. See y'all.